I want to introduce you to another method of creating lists using Python. We saw earlier when I created a list, I created a variable, I made it equal to a list of values, and I wrapped those values inside of square brackets, something like this here. So I say my lists equals, and I bring in some square brackets. So we'll say red, green, blue. And I close the square bracket. And there I've got my list. I can output the type, and it's of type class list. Now I'm going to introduce you to another method which is slightly different syntax. And I want to show you this for two different purposes. One, later on in this course, we're going to get much more in depth into a concept called object-oriented programming, which Python is an object-oriented language. It deals with classes and objects and methods and properties and so on. We've already seen the keyword class. Class and object, you're gonna hear those almost used kind of interchangeably with one another. Okay? Although we'll make a clear distinction between a class and an object and why we have two different terms. But we saw, if I do this, I print out the type for my lists, that we get to see that it's of type class list. It's a list object derived from the list class. Okay? And we'll talk more about that. We're going to get much more in depth into that, and we'll explain what that's all about, why that's important to us. Now, this is part of the reason why I want to show you this other approach, or this different syntax to creating this list object. The other reason is you're going to see it. You're going to get out there, people are going to be writing Python code, you're then going to go in and maintain code or take over or whatever, and you're going to see people create their lists or objects using this method as well, this syntax. So take a look. I'm going to create another list here. I'm going to call this awesome lists, and I'm going to make this equal to, I want to do a list object or a list type. And you recall, when I did it earlier, I just said square bracket, and I started giving it some values, and I closed the square bracket. Essentially a collection or an array of data. This time, using the list constructor, I'm going to say it's going to be equal to a list. Then I'm going to open up two parentheses, boom, boom, and I'm going to give it some values. So I'm just going to give it a couple of names here. We'll say Patrick's in there, and Logan's in there. Let's get a quote around that. There's Logan, and there's Brent. And then once I'm done, I've got my three values or however many values. I'm then going to close it with two parentheses. I'm going to hit my enter key. All right, I've got my new list. My awesome list here now contains these three values, all contained within the one variable, a list object. If I now output the type, we'll say print type awesome lists. I'm going to hit my enter key, and it's of class list. Same thing that we saw earlier. Now I can access elements from that list just like I did earlier. So we'll say print awesome lists, but I want to get just one of those names. Let's see, I want to get Brent. So where's Brent at? In relation with my list here, we got three values in there. Brent's the last one. Patrick is at the 0. Logan's at 1. Brent is at 2. All right, I'll hit my enter key, and there's Brent. So in the end, we're getting the same results. Two different ways of writing the creation of a list type or a list object. Now, there's a bit more going on in there, and we're going to talk about that as we start getting into the object-oriented concepts later on within this course. But keep that in the back of your head. There is different ways to be able to create objects. In this case, using the list constructor, the way that it's created and generated, and there's stuff that's going on in the background within the constructor that builds this list. All right, so try that out, get a feel for it. You can go back to the other method if you like to, with just the square brackets. But I want to make you aware of that there's this concept of objects, and objects contain constructors, the way that these objects are created, and we can utilize them as we build these objects ourselves. So Try that out, and then we'll jump into the next lecture, and we'll talk about the list methods.